All right, we'd like to welcome everybody to yet another heuristic and experiment at the Thought Barn at Sweetwater Foundation. It is an honor to be broadcasting live and have this moment of historical record of a translation of an experiment that goes across art, practice, humanities, civic engagement. It's this thing. Like we're just being human. It's a big old experiment of being human. So we're here on the south side of Chicago, at the intersection of Washington Park and Inglewood, and it is a site that has been known for being historically redlined. And we are currently in an area my organization, Sweetwater Foundation, has been operating since 2016. We're really close to the highway, hence the urban renewal history. We're really close to Hyde Park, which is on the opposite side of Washington Park. We're really close to downtown, ironically, but we're worlds away from the infrastructure and the setup of downtown. We're super close to the Great Lakes, but yet it feels like we're so far away. So on this day of a day without water, as part of the U.S. Water Alliance's initiative, national initiative, to really talk about the value of water, really deeply reflect about what does it mean to be without water. If water is the source of life and we are without it, you cannot live without 3 days of water. And I don't think people really actually appreciate how water is a source of life. So in order to honor it, in order to talk about it, we're in a moment where we're reflecting. So on this site, we are currently in the Thought Barn, which is the first barn, wooden frame barn in the history of Chicago since the Great Fire in 1871. We hand raised this as a block party to be a pavilion, to question the barn as an architectural typology, to do things for humans, not, farming as usual, not animals, not machinery, humans. So we've been using it as a pavilion for art installations, gatherings, farm-to-table experiences with people for the neighborhood, prioritizing neighborhood first, and then we bring in the networks. We have a 2-acre site this used to be Mosley School for Social Reform. It was one of the oldest schools of social reform was on this site here, Mosley School for Bad Boys, as it was known. So to recontextualize this old problematic school that was from this other paradigm with a farm as a community engagement around health and wellness is our focus. And then to create new schools of thought in the Thought Barn. And across the neighborhood, we have various installations around housing, transforming a house into a community school, another house into a human in residence stay in space. We have fellows and artists and other people from the network that can stay with us and work and be in fellowship with the team and the residents of the community. But in this space, in the Thought Barn, we have a lot of questions that we'd like to bring to front around race, class, gender, equity, what have you. But it all comes back to water. It all comes back to water. We are water. There's a percentage of our body that is water. 75% of our brains are water. Water has a memory. It is passed on from one generation to the next, and we need to honor that and think deeply. So we have a show here called Wellness at the Commonwealth, and it is think about the words. Wellness is health and wellness, public health, access. Commonwealth is a tricky one because Commonwealth is typically known as politics, and unfortunately politics as usual serves nobody any good, so we're tired of that. We need to rethink wellness and politics, and what a great way to just start that conversation with a prompt and a provocation like a well. So we first met one of the star artist of the show, Iñigo, through a partnership with Smart Museum and Towards a Common Cause. And Abby, when Abby first introduced us, she was like, Iñigo Manglano-Ovalle? And I'm like, no, who's that? And she was like, I got it. You should meet. And I'm like, what's this about? And then we met.
And that's how it started, right? Yeah. I think that, one of the things that I've always aspired to is that art begins as a conversation. It's produced as a conversation and then leads and provides a platform for an ongoing conversation. So when Abby Winograd, who's a curator from the MacArthur Foundation, set out to do a show about MacArthur Fellows on their 40th anniversary, she came to my studio and said, I have a proposal for you. I want you to consider being part of the show, but I want you to consider to do a specific project. And I thought to myself, oh, they're going to ask for something that I've already done. I want to be the one to choose what that thing is, right? And immediately I thought, I'd like to do another well, right? And then we worked for a number of months and got involved with the Smart Gallery at the University of Chicago, the Smart Museum rather. And in that process of thinking about how to do a well in an urban context like Chicago, I was introduced and I came to Sweetwater Foundation and met Emmanuel Pratt and met basically the crew of Sweetwater. And then that's how the conversation started. We started talking almost immediately. We started talking about how Sweetwater managed to do what they're doing. I mean, even just logistically, people power, land, and then the acquisition and the need for water. And we started a conversation about positing, the idea that we would do a permanent artwork that is a well, right? A well that would tap the aquifer, a well that would invite the public to perform, that is, move a lever up and down and draw water up from beneath their feet and fill a container, or maybe just a glass, and then offer the public would become, in a sense, the author or the artists of that performance, and their decision could be to consume that water or to share it with another. So all this is a simple gesture. In art, it's a simple line that is drawn from above to what is beneath, to touch something, to bring it up, and then to distribute it.
So
right?
what was so interesting about the conversation, and I'm going to weave in the rest of our guests into the conversation, but what was interesting about our initial contact was that we're here in the south side of Chicago operating a 2-acre farm in the middle of public good, feeding people, education, job creation, what have you, but not a water access on a site that used to be a school. So we said, what better way to think about the transformation of this pavilion of the Thought Barn by putting a well at the epicenter of the Thought Barn as a provocation to ask some questions about water access, infrastructure of water, the value of water. And so what happened, what evolved, is where we're at now with the show, The Wellness at the Commonwealth, which is a very interesting adaptation and translation of art meets education, meets jobs, meets neighborhood anchor. So in the show, we have different quadrants. I think we did through the Matterport early on, the virtual. Quadrant 1 is about the value of water. For us, water is sacred. But we also recognize that as humans that live in the city of Chicago, there is money that needs to be paid in order to support the infrastructure and equitably distribute access for all. We should figure that out. But there's questions about water as a bottled water. You know, why is it certain price points? Who can afford those price points? What's the quality and lead in the water? That's up for question. But, you know, we're asking, how much water are we supposed to consume? The second quadrant is a research project about the watershed. So there's a call to action about thinking about how much water do we need? Where is our water sources? What's the infrastructure and the history of the transformation of the city around water? And then, again, it's all dialoguing directly to the well as the center, value of water, history and epicenter of water. We have a lot of audience that comes from, in this neighborhood, from the Great Migration, Mississippi, Arkansas, Alabama. They have memories of wells, living with wells, growing up with wells, and water access. Then we have this challenge of redlining. Realistically, historically, in the United States, we have this marked history of institutionalized racism of place that has scarred us and traumatized us. So when you don't have housing and taxes and tax bases to support the infrastructure, if it's erased and it's displaced, and you're traumatized by the place and not having access to that water, and then the water is contaminated and you have lead in the water and that affects your brain and neuroplasticity and all types of other stuff for generations, what do? So what's great is that we talk about the erasure of the place, the policy of the place, bringing it back to the well, where people play and they imagine. Kids have never seen a well before. They get to play and they say, how does it work? What is this? Why isn't it working? Where's the water? But elders say, I remember when. I remember how many times I had to go out and get that water. That was our only source. I remember we didn't have water. I remember the groundwater was contaminated. So we pivot into another section, quadrant 3, which is a research project about what is a pump? How does it work? What is a well? Why is a well different from a pump? How does it actually work? What is the mechanisms to make this thing work? It's really tangible. This is performance art, perfect, because we have visitors that engage. Then we have like a breakdown of how pumps actually work. Again, dialoguing with the epicenter of the well. And then we have our value of a future of what does it mean to be in conversation with water access around education, career, workforce development. But what about like water in a park? Public access to water. What about housing? Why isn't this just one big park? If our city motto is herbs in horto, city in a garden, we have it. It's right here. So we've been inviting people to contribute into the visions of a future, collective visions of a future. That's quadrant 4. So you'll see a bunch of matter tags in each one. That's all, just making sure I put that out there. But it really is important that we think about, like, how do we pay to support water? What is the infrastructure needed in the overhaul when they've been neglected for generations? And it's an aging infrastructure. And climate crisis is real. And we're on the front lines in these red line neighborhoods. We are on the front lines of climate crisis. So how do we begin to change our perspective? And it was interesting when I met Debra. I think we actually met at the U.S. Water Alliance's inaugural event. And they've been trying to get us in conversation. We're like, why is the commissioner of the municipal water, like the water reclamation department, why are you in an art space? So how do we meet?
Yes, we met, I believe, in Minneapolis at a gathering of the Arts and Culture Advisory Council that the U.S. Water Alliance had pulled together.
Yeah.
And I'm on the board of commissioners of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. That's the agency that provides sewage treatment and stormwater management for most of Cook County. We serve the equivalent of 10 million people.
Wow.
Because we treat industrial and commercial and residential waste and manage stormwater for Chicago and 130 other municipalities. And it's an elected position that I've served in since 2006. But the changes in our environment, brought on by climate change and the challenges of managing our water resources in a wise and careful way, I think we need to use every language and every medium we can to connect with the people who live here and the people we serve. And so I think art and infrastructure and art and science have to be working in consonance with each other.
You, art as infrastructure
Yes.
is interesting also, right? We do these installations like urban acupuncture where the art responds to the traumas and history of the past. And what a great way to do it with a pump that's customized in the context in this neighborhood. But like, you mentioned something about like the metaphor of like a heart. And what was that you talking about?
So yes, Emmanuel, we were talking about the well and about pumps, because you have to draw the water up, either with a manual pump or a mechanical pump. And I immediately thought, we, as you noted, are water vessels. We carry water, we're 60% water in our bodies. And we have a pump, it's the heart, that brings oxygenated blood and pumps it through our bodies in this endless cycle of repetition. We depend on water to survive, and yet we are also carrying water wherever we go. It's been said that if you end the oil supply, the motor stops. But if you end the water supply, life stops. So just by way of background, the Water Reclamation District was founded more than 130 years ago, because at that time, people in Chicago were dumping all manner of human and animal and industrial waste into the Chicago River. In human habitation throughout the world, we dump garbage and waste into waterways, living ecosystems. Why do we do that? I think it's because it flows away. It gets carried away from us. So we aren't compelled to address the consequences of our population and effect on the ecosystem. But in Chicago, the river flowed into the lake, which was the source of our drinking water. We were contaminating our own drinking water, and people were getting sick from waterborne diseases like cholera and typhoid. And so they came up with a plan to dig a canal and build a lock at the mouth of the Chicago River and reverse the flow of the river, so that we used water, and still do, from Lake Michigan to flush our sewage away from the lake and carry it downstream. And it was a magnificent engineering feat, and I would submit allowed Chicago to become a great metropolis. And we have this wonderful source of drinking water, Lake Michigan. But we created several more problems, and now Chicago alone takes nearly 1 billion gallons a day of fresh water out of the lake, treats it, filters it, sends it to our homes, where some of it sits in a wheelbarrow called a toilet.
About the train.
Infrastructure.
Sits in a wheelbarrow called a toilet, waiting to convey our waste to a sewage treatment plant. Now we have treatment plants, including one of the largest in the world. We separate the liquid waste from the solid waste, but that treated wastewater is discharged into the system of Chicago waterways and ends up flowing down to New Orleans and dumping into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, how smart is that?
No.
That we take water out of this precious freshwater resource, use it once, and then send it down to the Gulf of Mexico. So we're trying to work on ways to reuse treated water, to recover nutrients out of the waste stream, to recognize that everything we used to consider waste has value. So how do we capture and monetize that value for the benefit of the public?
So it's interesting you mentioned, one, the reversal of the river, because most people don't understand what. Yes, it was an ingenuity. It was a man-made initiative, but with severe consequences.
Correct.
That we have a problem. Humans have a real serious problem of being short-sighted of history, and nature's time is very different from our human time. We don't think about time in the same way. So it's interesting because, like, when you scale out and understand, we'll just flush it there. Out of sight, out of mind. We don't think about how it goes all the way to, we had people in other states directly impacted. But to go from the Great Lakes, which is 20% of the world's freshwater resources, to flush it like a toilet out into the Gulf of Mexico. It passes right past New Orleans. It just goes right through. And no one's talking about Mississippi, and everywhere else is dealing with our problems. We're not thinking about it. So it's interesting to round out the conversation. Amy showed up on the scene in a mysterious fashion. We have people that show up for food and gardens, and they show up. We're like, great, let's engage. Who are you? Well, I'm Amy, but I'm here to meet somebody. Well, who are you meeting? So we had a network of people that were just meeting and convening at the garden, and that's what this space is for. Mm-hmm. But it became much more interesting just a meeting. And we found out that Amy was an artist. Amy is an activist. She's an actionist. She's a transformative disruptor. But you should tell them about how we met and then what you do.
Oh, we had a great meeting. Actually, I had come to Chicago on a very small travel scholarship to talk to a community leader in Chatham. And that particular leader told me there was nothing to see in Chatham, and I'm thinking, that can't be true. There's got to be something there, because she was referred to me. So she suggested that we meet at Sweetwater instead, because she had been following Sweetwater and she just loved the place. So I said, okay. I had no choice but to follow her, because she was the person I was supposed to meet. So we show up unannounced, and what does Emmanuel do? He puts us off the property.
We say, hold on, there's a better way to engage. There's a better way to engage. Let's find out who we are. It's a rainy day. Do you want some food? There's a better way to engage. You got time? We're at the end of our work day, wrapping up, been hectic. Can you come back another time? Can you come back?
That's true.
Yep.
But what sticks in my mind is that we were ordered off the property.
This is true too.
Somehow you don't forget that.
No.
When a gentleman over 6 feet tells you to leave, you leave. And I was soaking wet, but I took up the challenge, and both actually Lori Burns, shout out to her in Chatham, and I wrote to Emmanuel to request an appointment, because we had to do it by request over email. So my last day in Chicago, we come to Sweetwater. I was very excited about doing it. And there's one reason in particular that I was pretty intrigued by Emmanuel, because he looked at my business card and he said, so you call yourself an urbanist, we'll see about that. And I was like, game on.
See?
Game on.
Yep.
So actually our meeting on my last day was really very productive, very fruitful. Obviously I'm here. And when we were looking at the reconstruction house, I asked Emmanuel, well, how do you get to stay here? And he said, you do a residency, and the rest is pretty much history.
And there's one thing that was really, really, really telling about that moment. It was a confluence of convergence.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Right. So we had been through a lot that week, and it was like just a lot happening, and we were drained. And I was like, honestly, this is the wrong moment to engage.
Yes. Right.
This is the wrong start. But because I feel like there's something more here. Because you're coming from New Orleans, you're coming from Chicago, but y'all all seem to know each other, and you never met. How does this, you've never all been in the same space, but there's such a crazy energy here. Let's just re-engage, because it was interesting, because I was feeling you out, because you had such a very intent focus. And I was like, there's something there where she's trying to translate a little bit of this to a little bit of that, and a little bit of that. And then we talked about the possibility of
Yes.
humans in residency, because
Yes.
I think it was the most important, and it's still resonating with us.
Yes, it is. And I have to say, when you're a human in residence, there's a lot to take in. There is a lot to resonate, with, actually. So, on that note, I'm going to ask you guys to reflect, because the theme of the day is Imagine a Day Without Water. So, actually, I'm going to read from the website and then pose a question to you guys. So, no water to drink or wash your hands with, no water to shower, flush the toilet, or do laundry. Hospitals would close without water. Firefighters couldn't put out fires, and farmers couldn't water their crops. Disease would spread. And of course, we're in the midst of a pandemic, and I consistently think about the homeless who don't have access to water, particularly the ones that live a half block from my house under the dreaded Claiborne Expressway,
In New
another
Orleans.
product of urban renewal, and they essentially live in dirt, but they don't seem to have COVID. So we're told to keep clean, but then we don't provide for people who actually really need to keep clean. So I'd like everybody to imagine a day without water. And the question is, have you ever lived a day without water? And what was that like?
Have I ever lived a day without water?
Yes.
I don't think I've ever lived a day without water, but I've lived many days, a number of days, in which I've had to really think about it.
Okay.
Right? So when I was in high school, I did a program down in. I was part of a program in Nicaragua, and we were doing an immunization, And I was a youngster, and we arrived to a village, and we have to get our own water, right? And
Okay.
the pump is not working, so we have to go. We're directed up a hill to a stream, and to collect the water that we'll need for that day and the next day.
Hey, Nico,
Right.
we're going to lean into it.
Oh, you need
Yeah.
you need me to speak
Yeah,
a little
yeah.
louder. Okay, thank you. So, and then just recently, when we went to quarantine up in Wisconsin, where I have a well that it functions by electric pump, I had to think about, well, what if the electricity goes out?
Yes.
What if the electricity goes out? I need to actually go down to Sweetwater, pick up this thing, and install it in my well. So there was a lot of thought that was given to that. The last thing I want to think about is something you and I talked about. Last year I saw an image in a newspaper that has stuck with me. It's a very simple image, and it's 12 empty gallons of water containers. And if you look at the image is, you can see that they're empty, there are no bottles, they're just dumped on the ground. And then if you look closer to it, you see that each bottle has been slashed by a box knife. And then when you read the caption, this had been water left just north of the U.S.-Mexico border for migrants crossing the border in probably the worst terrain to be traveling through. And somebody, the Border Patrol, some person of authority, right, had taken this water that had been left for people and slashed it. Not just emptied it out, but actually slashed it,
Right.
And so that's a moment that I didn't live without water, but I thought very closely about humans living desperately a day or days without water as they move across a boundary.
Well, I have to say, if your electric pump goes out, you will live at least one day without water, which has been my experience. And if you live in disaster-prone areas like New Orleans or the Gulf Coast or the Atlantic Seaboard, and you live in a community that is served by wells and septic tanks, if the electricity goes out, you have no water. And the good thing about living in a community like that is that you learn about the shared economy of water, which is exactly what you speak to. And I want to make a comment that this is art as infrastructure, but also infrastructure as art. So I'd like to ask Emmanuel and Debra, have you ever had an experience of having to live without water?
You want to go?
I have not.
Okay.
And I want to mention a terrific book by Charles Fishman called The Big Thirst. And the subtitle is The Secret Life and Turbulent Future of Water.
Okay.
And one of the points he makes is that in much of the developed world, we have already lived through what he calls the golden age of water, where three qualities that water was largely safe, affordable, and abundant will no longer be present at the same time.
Right.
That water may be safe and abundant, but it won't be cheap. And we've been so successful in much of the developed world that water infrastructure has become invisible. We turn on the faucet and expect water to come out, and almost always it does. We flush our toilets and expect our waste to be carried away, and almost always it is.
Right.
And we don't know how it gets to the faucet or how it gets carried away from us. And it's just invisible to us, and
Yes.
yet it's essential.
Yes.
And yet there are many, many thousands of people in this country, which we consider the developed world, who do not have access to clean water, to safe water, to faucets that automatically the water will come out.
Right. So it's the homeless and the impoverished and people who live in rural communities.
Rural communities.
So
Yeah.
what
So,
about your experience?
I've gone. I've got various memories, childhood memories of being out in a rural context, growing up in the country, that we had limited access, and then there was a moment where we were like, we don't have access to water. I don't remember if it was the whole day, but it was a serious question and panic of like, what do we do about the water now? So that's childhood in a rural setting. Then we had in a poverty setting where me and my mom, we would move to where it was affordable. And then there was lots of questions about the actual water, because you turn it on and it's brown. You turn it on, it's different colors. And then at the household level, you're like, I can't drink this. So what do we do with this? There's been a number of times where we've had water, but someone else in the area has not. So we've had to do the shared economy, the shared resource
Yes.
of water. And then more recently, I visited people in Michigan that had been facing the water shutoffs.
Right.
So not me personally having to go through that, but going through it with people and listening to, like, when you can't flush the toilet and you got to figure out what you do with that,
Yes.
that hits very deep, like very, very deep. And then there's networks of people we have conversations with in South Africa pretty regularly, in family members in squatter camps or what have you, that just have no access to running water. So it's a steady pulse, like you said, mentioned the heart, is a steady pulse of the conversation. But like just here at this particular site, there's a lot of moments where we're like, well, how in the world do we have access to water to do the things we need to do for the public good, farming, gardening, what have you? And there was moments where if we're opening the hydrant, we started to attract people to the hydrant because folks that are homeless or just passing by that don't have access to water, which is often, will
Right.
come to the hydrant and say, can I get some water? And we're like, it's a public hydrant. It's dripping out of it. Yes, here. In fact, here's a glass of water.
Yes.
So it's interesting because this whole concept of water memory, we're trying to collect these types of stories as well. I know you had some water access issues, memories, right?
Primarily through with the hurricane, and you really see it in hurricanes. You can prepare, but only to a certain extent, because you can run. I mean, I grew up in New Orleans, so I was, raised in hurricane territory, and we would fill the bathtub so that we could flush the toilet
Yep.
when there was no access to water. So you can do that, but that only goes so far, right? So clearly we know that water is the source of life. But in New Orleans, because of the climate and the flooding, it's a source of fear, which we need to get over that. But also in places like Vietnam, Tran had a moment yesterday when we were talking about water as a weapon, because when you think of Agent Orange, that land is still contaminated, so the groundwater is still poison and it's still toxic. And now Vietnam is undergoing arsenic poisoning in the water because of the extreme pumping. And then there's Flint. We know the stories about Flint. So we weaponize water and it cripples or kills us. So how can we achieve water equity in places where water has been used and is linked to things like death and violence and loss and brutality? So how do we achieve water equity, particularly when the water has memories of these harsh things? And of course, water stewardship, because we have to change. We have to become compassionate when it comes to water. But it's difficult when you've been brutalized by it. So how do we change that landscape?
I got answers, but we're sitting in one right now, but I'll let y'all talk first.
Well, I would just say that water and air are part of our habitat that we share, not only as human beings, but with other creatures and plants, that this is an opportunity to have a common weal and a commonwealth, W-E-L-L-T-H, and W-E-A-L-T-H, that we can build bridges because we share and deserve fresh water and clean air. And we got to talk about it with each other, and we got to work on projects together with each other. And
So
But that's what this is, right? That's what started you to do that in other cities.
Well, in a way, I mean, I've been thinking about a lot of things that people are saying, and about this notion of invisibility, that we don't know, that our public in a developed world, right, regardless of whether we're downtown or on the south side of Chicago, people are not conscious of a thing. And so art sometimes only is there to leverage a kind of consciousness of the thing. And what we need to do, one of the things that we need to do are a whole set of policy, infrastructure, programs that provide these things. But I fear that we're not going to do that if we don't know what water is, There's a beautiful poem by Emily Dickinson, and the title of the poem is also the first line and the best line of that poem, and it's called "Water is Taught by Thirst." Right? That's the beginning of that poem. And it leads me to believe that it is when something is scarce that we want to know about it even more. We want to know about how to get it, where it comes from, and what it is. So for me, knowledge base is one of the first things that we have to do, and that's what the exhibition that Sweetwater has done here, this wellness exhibition, is providing a kind of knowledge base to begin a conversation, to make something that is invisible, right? Intangible, maybe in some ways, actually visible, right? Whether it's as information or as object or as something that actually quenches our thirst.
So, in this context, like, I am a fan of art. I feel like there is a time and place for certain types of art. In a moment of the arc of the history of the time of the clock on the world, there's a role for change. It has to be through these provocations, but truth be told, nobody wants to be accountable. So we have to create accountability frameworks, and this is one of many, of saying, well, what about an industry of plastic bottles that is now currently in our oceans and seas and all types of pollutants that are having drastic effects because the currents of the world aggregate them, and now you have islands of plastic bottles that are larger than Texas. That kills off an ecosystem, and it's because it's out of sight, out of mind. There's an infrastructure, there's an industry, but there's also individual accountability. It's both and, it's not either or. So there's a history of neglect and short-sightedness that has affected the Great Lakes. There's oil spills all the time in the Great Lakes that are rendered invisible, that no one talks about. There's histories and time of institutionalized practices of racism like redlining that have a short-sighted value of money as God that then have contaminated, and we're living with the traumas of that. So we should talk about it. This is a reconciliatory place and space to talk about it. We should talk about it because we talk about how much money is wasted on other types of initiatives for new development when they should be doing restorative work in neighborhoods that have been traumatized. This is an example. We know what the costs and what the needs are for infrastructure to move forward so we can actually have housing. But do you densify in a time of COVID? In the reality, do you go back to the same level of density? I say no. We say no. When you have all this property that is neglected, absentee, people that own the property don't live there, are not engaged, there is another use, a use of fructuary, a better, useful, fruitful production of the land and water that better serves the neighborhood and the community, feeds people, educates, whatever. But we have to talk about redlining. We have to talk about the neglect, municipal disinvestment, histories and generations of neglect. So we're creating a platform and space to say, let's deal with the problems, let's deal with the necessary therapy and mental health and wellness that comes with this generations of neglect and trauma. But we need to create a vision for a hopeful future that addresses the immediacy of right now. People are living without water. People have access to water and don't even care about it. So we have to balance it out. So this is the first step of bridging and translating. But this is for everybody out there in the noosphere. Every single panel is a research project that we're challenging people, say, take it, research it, give us an input and feedback. It will be reflected in the space, and it'll be a rolling conversation as a collective publication of what is going on and how do we do something to fix it. Right.
So I think this will probably be our last question because we're going to open up for questions from the audience. So Sweetwater Foundation has a manifesto. It's called We the Publics. And the manifesto is to restore democracy and truth in the Republic. So it declares that if any individuals, organizations fail to uphold the preservation of life through their actions and decisions, any related assets and associated spaces shall be subjected to the reclamation of said assets and returned to the public domain. And I say that act of returning often calls for creative disruption. So for each of you, and I'd like to start with Debra because you're a public official, and this is probably not the way people think of public officials doing things for the public good. So reclaiming that calls for creative disruption. So how is your practice, and this is about practice, your personal practice and your professional practice, how do you frame your practice in terms of creative disruption? Because I know that you are a fan of things like green infrastructure, which in most municipalities, they're kind of slow, they're slowly coming along. So how does that creative disruption work for you, for the people, as a public official?
Thank you, Amy. That's a wonderful question and challenge. So I think about rain a fair amount, and my whole relationship to rain changed once I joined the board of the Water Reclamation District. We need it, we want it, it's essential for plants to grow, our gardens, and yet too much of it causes flooding and destruction and big problems. I live in a single-family home in Skokie with a rather large asphalt driveway. And we calculated how much runs off of our driveway and into the street where it collects salt and oil and contaminants, goes into the storm sewer, mixes with sewage so it gets contaminated, and then goes to a treatment plant to be treated, and then we send it to the Gulf of Mexico.
Right. Thank you.
So we're taking essentially a pretty clean freshwater resource in the form of rain, delivered free of charge directly to our doorstep, and then we're turning it into contaminated water. So, and we calculated that if we could capture what falls on our roof and driveway in a year, because there are two of us who live in the home, it would come to 125% of our annual water use.
Wow.
But we just don't have the capacity to store it and filter it and treat it safely. So part of it is, as you know, green infrastructure. How do we as a region become more like a sponge? How do we use every tool we have and new tools to capture rain where it falls, allow it to recharge our underground water sources, or slow the flow into our sewers? And so I've talked with Emmanuel and others about an idea to repurpose rail tank cars, which can hold 30,000 gallons, and will no longer be able to be used to transport oil because of new safety standards requiring double hulls. Well, we can put those next to a big box store or maybe funneled into a neighborhood, capture 30,000 gallons of essentially fresh water,
Yes.
and use that for irrigation or for other purposes. And so we need a distributed network throughout our neighborhoods of rain capture systems, big cisterns, and so on. So part of my practice is to talk about it, to carry around a bucket as a prop,
Yes.
because my best friend used to live in Santa Fe, where water is more costly and more scarce, and she would keep a bucket in her shower stall. And when she turned on the water, waited for it to warm up, she captured that in a bucket because it's perfectly good, drinkable water going right down the drain in that minute or so it takes to warm up. And you can use that water to flush a toilet if you live in an apartment, to water your garden, for your pets, or wash your car, whatever. It's great. And it's pennies saved, but it's fresh water.
Right. Right.
So related to that, I mean, we've because we haven't had infrastructure here on site to support the gardening and the farming per se, we've been really creative, and we have a network of people that know how to be resourceful and creative. So we do what we do. We've been designing sculpture objects like the IBCs, intermediate bulk containers that are 300-gallon, 275 to 300-gallon capacity, and creating a butterfly roof. We call it the Monarch Tower. So it's a butterfly roof structure that collects up and goes up like an obelisk to collect the water into this 300-gallon-ish capacity, and in creating a demonstration of a living water sculpture that then we can add solar power to it to collect the energy that into a battery source that then has a sump pump that then kicks out water at a particular PSI, pound per square inch, so we can run a 1.6 horsepower. All of this is education-based, experiential, heuristic, trial and error, learn how to do it, refine it, get better with technology. So we're creating all these little experiments that then become art projects, become education projects, and then ideally, like, we're starting to talk to other gardens and other gardeners and other folks about water capture. So what we started doing is putting these images like in these boards over here, just to unpack the invisible information of like, you get 300 gallons of water to come off of your roof.
Right.
What do you do with it? How do we collect it? What do we offset it? But also, if you're gardening, farming, or if you have trees, if you do nurseries, there's a certain type of plant or tree that you can plant and should be planting in your neighborhood. So I was listening to you, and it's like the traditional paradigm is somebody says, "Oh, we should make a design competition about it." We will, by the way.
Ooh.
But what we don't want to have is misinformed information. A lot of times in a moment of crisis, people think about utopian ideas. Like, utopia, as a reminder, is no place. It doesn't exist. So what we like to do is have biomimetic informatic systems, biologically informed like this. If you pump it, how many pumps? What's the energy exerted? What do you actually have to do? What's the actual depth? What's the physics of how things work? Don't just put out a provocation that works kinda. Probably doesn't work, but what does it actually do? So it helps us to think about it. So we're saying biologically informed information systems that we can actually put out designs and know the technology to support it, supporting nature as a response to climate crisis. So we do have sensors. We do have ways to monitor this stuff. We should be using it for the right reasons, not controlling it by tech, or only to patent it per se.
Right.
But actually putting it out as an open source platform, so we should be figuring it out because we need to. So,
Right.
Yeah, I think that what struck me when I first came to Sweetwater was just that creative disruption.
Yes.
I mean, at that point, now after many conversations with Emmanuel and the folks at Sweetwater, I get a sense of the history of what building came first, what garden came next. I also begin to understand what property does Sweetwater actually own. What is it leasing? What is it being gifted? And each of these are really very different sort of arrangements that Sweetwater has with the city of Chicago, right? And all sorts of authorities, right? So, but when I first came here, I just said, oh, and this piece here, oh, well, that's a neighbor, somebody who owns that is letting us kind of put this building there. And this piece here, oh, well, that we're leasing out from the city, but this piece we're looking to purchase. And I was just really interested in a group that was saying, this is not some vacant area. This is an area that can actually be put to use, right?
Right.
And we just have to find a way to gain access to that, but mostly begin to work it. So mostly it was action, work on the property. In a way, from with someone who is not totally familiar, Emmanuel, there was times when I thought, I love these guys because they're just like squatting everything. They're just taking it over. They go, no one's using this. We will use it. And I thought, this is the perfect place to do a water project, because I go back to a creative disruption when I used to work on the west side of Chicago with young men and women creating videos around violence. The videos were theirs, and the art gesture was really always just these extension cords that would plug into people's homes and businesses and find their ways out into the street so the young people could show their video installations. And every once in a while, because I put myself through graduate school as an unlicensed electrician, I would tap the electricity of city lampposts, right, to power up their videos. And so art sometimes comes in as a kind of Trojan horse, right?
Yes.
In other words, things that might not might not be something you can do if you just follow infrastructure permit lines. If it comes in as art, there might be a way to circumvent these things. So that also is part of the conversation, you know.
So since you have the floor, I'll start with a question that is specifically for you, and you
Yeah.
partially answered it. And the question is, Iñigo, this is such a different context than Santa Fe. How does that inform your thinking about the work?
Totally. It's actually turned it upside down numerous times. So it's gone from, wouldn't it be great to tap an aquifer, to working with geologists and engineers and going, no, we're not going to do that. We won't find safe potable water. How do we tap the city main? How do we tap a building that might be owned by either Sweetwater or a neighbor? To, is the well something that actually functions as something that is designed to produce potable water? Or should we be thinking about an irrigation system or a series of hydrants? You know, if you come to Sweetwater, Lafayette and 57th are the cross sections of it. So Emmanuel and I recently were just kind of just knocking the idea about, and he's very good. He's very good about questioning the work, right? Questioning the work on both aesthetic, critical, and pragmatic or practical circumstances.
Right.
And we found ourselves sitting on one of the benches outside and going, what if in this place that is essentially four corners and four quadrants, what if the project became 4 hydrants? One for the community garden, one for the Sweetwater farm, one for the reconstruction house,
Yeah.
and one hydrant for the meeting, the public meeting area. So, because it is a conversation and leverages conversation and ultimately should be made for discourse, right? Is impacted by that discourse as long as it's honest and frank, as long as the artist is willing to come in and listen,
Yeah.
and the host is also willing to also be open to ideas, right? Yeah.
Okay, can I respond to that? Or
Sure.
you had another question?
I do, but respond.
So what I deeply appreciated about the connection with Iñigo and Abby and the network and Smart Museum and, is that there's this constant convergence of people that share values. The value is we need to do better. We should have better principles, ethos, ethics, morality. It should just be something better. They want art to activate some kind of a response and a reflection, but to do something about something. So when we met, we talked, we were like, this is the perfect provocation to talk about water in this neighborhood. And then it was after the relationship building of like, you jump right in to do the work. You started working side by side with the carpenters, side by side with the team, the apprentices, the urban ecology fellows, and developed an actual working relationship, human infrastructure and relationship that allowed for these natural organic conversations and memories and reflections to happen to inform the work. And then the questions that came out of like, well, are we really gonna put a well, an old school well? It needs to speak to the memory of the well for sure, because like we have a population that remembers the well.
Right.
But what does it mean in a 21st century context here? And how do we translate it? And when we sat and talked and shaped that conversation, and he was so open to receiving feedback from the team, from the network, from me, that it evolved the nature of the work, which has evolved the practice. And it was crazy. It was amazing how it tied so well, pun intended, to the vertical water systems that we're doing with the water bottles.
Right.
because like the water bottles are everywhere around in the street. I mean, I've literally watched people pull up, take a sip of water, throw it out the car. It's like, what just happened? Why did what happened? Why did that happen? So we go around and we collect the water bottles just right here in the footprint in the area to become an education project around gallons, ounces, you know, quarts, et cetera, PSI, gallons per hour, head height, education, all tied directly back to this well.
Right.
How deep can you go with a well? How much energy is needed for the well? So our education initiatives have this really, really interesting resonance here, but now in this time of COVID, where we're broadcasting these research projects and assignments out to schools, to homes, and we're getting this really amazing feedback that is, you know, what can I do in a moment of climate crisis? Well, you could do your part. You could be more aware. You could be more active and engaged. And
It's a question of shared authorship
yeah.
and an understanding that that what you're writing, what you're setting out to produce, actually is never complete. So, for example, the well in Santa Clara Pueblo that started to look like this, right? 2 years later, they had a fire in the area, not in Santa Clara Pueblo, but in the hills, in an area very revered by the indigenous community, and it devastated a very particular conifer. And so the community that now owned the artwork in the well asked me, is there any way we can convert this to actually irrigate these seedlings, because they wanted to repopulate that hill with new seedlings of conifers. So the well was re-engineered to receive a solar cell and a pump, a simple pump. And now from filling up buckets, it becomes a trickle that then leads and then sort of feeds this. So the authorship is shared, is always shared. And the novel doesn't end, you know. Yeah.
Okay.
Iñigo and Emmanuel, I just want to share an idea with you that I've been thinking about, which is what would a 21st century aqueduct look like? The Roman aqueducts certainly served a utilitarian purpose first, but they were also works of art and elegant and revered. And we could take water from roofs and run it through a 21st century aqueduct that makes it visible, that turns water wheels, that is playful, that is art, that pushes things that make kids laugh, and yet that conveys that water to a place. And right now we put it in downspouts and make it invisible just to get it away from us.
That's an interesting answer, and I think both Emmanuel and Debra have responded, hopefully adequately enough, to a question about integrating water conservation and stewardship into educational systems. So I think you've given examples of how that can be done. So I'm going to go to this question. How do you teach the type of water scarcity that is comparable to Emmanuel's favorite thing, diamond scarcity, that was created, so that people understand the dire situation we're in? And for the audience, one of Emmanuel's favorite topics is the
Diamond water
paradox. So why don't we start with you?
Okay. So any economists out in the world, there's this like conundrum. There's this like, how do you justify a fictitious price point of a diamond that questionably, what use does it have? It's pretty, looks good. And what's the labor associated with making and retrieving that? What's the reality of which has finally come to light, of like blood diamond conversations, right? What's the labor needed in order to get it? You have child labor and all types of other just vicious cycles of exploiting human capital, people, and the earth. But you put it at an exorbitant price point that celebrates it for a certain select population. Now, water should be for all because we all need it to live. It is a source of life. It is a source of death and negation of future. So we want to embrace a future. So how do you figure out the balance of this price point that allows people to feel like they're actively engaging, supporting it, doing it? And then also, do you really put a price point? If you put a price point where a water bottle is $8, and it happens,
It happens. Yeah.
who's drinking that water? Who has access to that water?
Right.
So what I loved about this concept, and I am very, very open to a design competition, that we're we might just issue one as a result, as a byproduct of this publication, that we'll then ask you, since you brought it up, how are we going to make it happen? And then we'll go to the city and the officials and say, let's make it happen. We'll put a prize out. But how do we do a design that does allow for us to render the invisible visible so that the future, the children, and then their children's children regain a critical connection to that source of life? Because we have to grow up with this over generations. We have to. There's a seventh generation principle that we have inherited this planet, this earth, and we have to do our part for not just us and our next generation, but for 7 generations. So.
Okay, so we're gonna let the train pass. But I'd like to use that to segue into this question. What do people need to know about the scarcity of water in the Great Lakes region? Because you think, I mean, I'm a visitor. Lake Michigan is huge. When I look at it on the map, it looks endless to me, just like I'm sure the Gulf of Mexico looks endless to other people. But we have dead zones from the trash, so we know the trash and the oil and gas. So we know in the South that this is a finite thing because water is dying or the environment is dying. So what about the Great Lakes region?
AKA the Sweetwater Seas.
Sweetwater what?
Seas. There's a documentary out right now called that explores a saying, a reference to the Great Lakes as the Sweetwater Seas. It just came out. You know, what's interesting is like it's because it's there. It's over there. It's not here. So we've created a city that reinforces the practice of saying it's over there. It's not here. But what's coming to light and what's coming to bear is that the more we have pharmaceuticals, we have other stuff that's in our bodies that goes into the waste stream. There's traces of our remains of these chemicals and what have you that are found in the fish. The mercury levels of the perch are now reflecting a problem, a serious problem that affects the reproductive health of women that are childbearing. So as much as we can do in the school system, in our daily lives, in accountability frameworks, in public policy, we always talk about livable, walkable, healthy, green cities and all that stuff. That's just empty rhetoric. It's bogus. Like, it doesn't mean anything. You just talk about it, you put $5 million towards a plan, it doesn't do anything, and then it just passes. A decade goes by, and one would argue we don't have a decade to spare. So we got to do something different.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I also want to sort of respond to the water diamond thing because I think,
I'm sorry.
in a way, and this question, because one of my biggest concerns about the Great Lakes is what's happening in certain areas of New England. That is, you have for many years a community or civic institutions that have been cleaning and investing into systems to clean their water, provide water for their communities. And so you have one town doing this and one county doing this and one county doing this. And recently, those separate municipalities have come together and said, let's give this over to this corporation, right? And so now, let's say in Connecticut no longer, cities or municipalities in Connecticut are no longer managing and distributing that water and gaining the revenue or providing for their citizens. It's a corporation based out of Switzerland. Okay? So when I look at that, and I think, Deborah, you said earlier, water, like air, is our resource. And I'm going, yeah, but water is becoming a commodity. And the moment that the system that you talk about, that you're involved in, that you're running, right? That someone decides that some private corporation can do your job better for us, the citizens, is the first step in which we start tapping the Sweetwater Seas, Lake Michigan, and the Great Lakes for other resources other than their local citizens. So this is something we really have to think about, because the concept and the first step moving in that direction is this idea that we think that water is ours, and it isn't. We've created systems, and now with bottled water, we've now created a whole market, right, of making water a commodity.
Yes.
And so what's the next step, Deborah? Is it air? Air? Will air? Someone's going to figure out how to make air a commodity.
There's a market right now where you walk around and pay $500 to $1,000 for a bubble to be COVID-free air.
Right.
It exists. It's out there.
Yeah.
It's
Comedians have made jokes about air being in their mama's name. And if you are from a poor community, quite often utilities have to be put, if you don't have any money, your utilities are put in the name of a family member or friend, so you can get them turned on. So there's a comedian who riffs off of that and talks about putting air in his mama's name because he can't put it in his own name. He can't even afford it. So speaking of that, here's a question. How should we build accountability structures to reduce plastic bottle waste that is produced by corporations but consumed by everyday people? So accountability, why don't I start with you, Deborah, because that's a policy issue or question, and you're our policy person here, officially.
Sure.
I'll
and
follow up.
So absolutely, there is a move afoot in many places for adopting a product stewardship model, that the manufacturer of a product, whether it's paint or electronics or pharmaceuticals or plastic bottles, should be responsible for the full life cycle of that product and move towards a circular economy.
Okay.
So that's behind sort of trying to ban plastic bags because of their harm on the environment, and that's happened in some places. I'm not aware of efforts to ban plastic bottles, but that could happen. But maybe more likely is to require the manufacturers to have a stewardship program so that they have ways to collect and recycle or remake the used bottles. But so I've been working on a pharmaceutical collection program so that people have a safe, secure way to dispose of their unused and expired medicine so they don't flush it down the toilet
Right.
or pour it down the drain, and so it doesn't enter our waterways. Because we can't remove all of those chemicals at the treatment plants. And that's an increasing move around the country, is to require the manufacturers to be responsible. But we also need to model it in our own behavior, never use a plastic water bottle, require the organizations that we're part of never to buy and use water bottles, and pass out. I know many colleges have passed out reusable water bottles at the start of the school year.
Right, so that is a way to do it. So here's a question specifically for you, and the question is, how will you help out by actually providing water for community gardens in Chicago?
Good question. Our agency doesn't filter and provide drinking water. We do have very high quality used water that's from our treatment plants, and we could probably arrange to have some of it in huge water tanks or trucks be delivered
That's a
to
good
community gardens. We could work on that.
Yes. And I know that trucks are available because when we don't have water during the hurricanes, typically the National Guard brings water into communities with trucks. I just need to do a quick time check. Do we have time for one more question, or should we be wrapping up?
Yeah.
One more question. So we know there is lead in the water in Chicago and free tests are available, but we also know that there is no money to fix the problem. What do residents do to manage contaminated water? And also how to manage the fear of, I guess, finding out that you are consuming contaminated water. So what are we telling people about this management issue?
The concept that there's no money to deal with the problem is a myth. It's not true. It's not accurate. There's money that's designated all the time through TIFs, tax incremental finances that are completely misused and mismanaged historically, not just in Chicago, everywhere. It is a complete lie that there is not money in order to support the fixes of the problem. When you say that, there's a $50 million deficit that affects the Chicago public school system, but then you put a $1 billion development in another neighborhood, or you support a $7 billion proposal for a tech industry with a $2 billion TIF support, you have to ask some critical questions. Whose future are you building? For who? For what? And then who are you negating? And so there is money available. There's also, we need to stop greenwashing and just falsifying the language of saying, well, we're proposing this thing that's going to be better for everybody when it's not. There's money available right now to do the fixes needed incrementally, gradually, step by step. As you introduce a new system, we should be monitoring. On the ground, people have the right, the voice, and the means in order to document what is happening. So we have to take our own accountability and say, get the test. Find out what support network you need. Hold somebody accountable. We have elected officials that were supposed to be doing jobs, but they can get run roughshod because no one is holding them accountable.
Yeah.
We're watching this unfold in front of our eyes with people getting away with literal murder, and they were just like, nobody's accountable.
Or to just hold our civic leaders to what they've promised, okay? Because under Richard Daley, right? So that's now 2 mayors away. There's a whole plan to repipe the city, right? Which is a preemptive plan. In other words, it's not reactive to a situation unhealthy. It would be a preemptive one. It's not, let's repipe the city as well as redo. And I don't know where that went.
It came up 2 weeks ago. It resurfaced in the conversation with the mayor, current mayor. She's saying, we should do something to proactively deal with lead. I was like, all right, great. If you're going to deal with lead in the water that is publicly documented in the school systems, in parks, in houses, then why not look at the soil? Look at the histories of lead in soil that are mapped, and there's all in the academic world. They do the whole. There's a taxonomy of studies. There's an endless report. How many more studies do you need to know about the neurological implications of lead in water or soil in poor neighborhoods? Do we really need more studies of that? How many hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars could just be deflected and actually do something about it instead of talking about research?
Yeah, I think that's what I'm presenting is that take the action.
Exactly.
Just take the action. You know that the city, right, has an antique water system. Give us a new one. This is what you promised.
So related to that, this is the beginning of a year-long conversation about these realities, but we're connecting it to a church that we're renovating down the block. that we're calling the Civic Arts Church, which is historic preservation. And realistically, we're linking it to another artist, Mel Chin, who's doing an installation tied to the lead and soil and fundreds, rethinking money and currency, but directly tied to the conversation around water here. Like, what happens when these kids that live in areas that have lead in the soil that are directly in the same neighborhoods that have lead in the water? How do we hold people accountable for their futures? So we're having a conversation about that right now. So we're moving forward
Okay.
into the future.
So we're allowed to take
I think the
last question, and we just have one more. And your answer, of course, flows right into this, which is, how can people be healthy if the ecosystems, including water, are polluted and contaminated? That's part one. And how can you have a health/sick care system if it does not respond to unhealthy ecosystems, which is a fabulous question. And does this just exist for people to profit from ecosystem dysfunction that results in human disease, especially waterborne illnesses and bacteria? So
that's a dissertation.
Yes, it's a dissertation.
Which is the beginning of
It
a
is.
series of research projects, conversations, and actionable items that there are no quick fixes to any of this. We have to go into this with the understanding that it's going to go across generations in order to deal with this reality. There are urgent, immediate issues right now that deserve money, responses, and the appropriate response right now. But again, it goes back to, like, if you don't know it, if you don't understand it, it's an invisible thing. It's fictitious. I don't know how it affects me, so why does it matter to me? But when we start to connect to each other and understand in so many different ways, it all comes back to the same source of life. Like, we're all human.
Right.
We should be rethinking and sharing and creating a new structure of consciousness. And I think that's what we're doing right now.
And I would also add that we can place ourselves in right relationship with the land, that we needn't just be users or abusers of natural resources. We can be caring stewards. I've been involved in habitat restoration. We can act in such a way that makes amends for the damage we've done and restore our habitat, restore our neighborhoods, regrow our neighborhoods.
Okay. Iñigo, any final thoughts?
Very famous artist Marcel Duchamp said, "Everything is plumbing."
Everything is plumbing.
Yes.
Which includes us, as you correctly pointed out, that we have a system of plumbing. But I think it goes further in if we accept that we are a system, right? And that there's another system out there, that there is actually a porosity between these supposed separate systems, that is us as bodies and the ecology, that there's actually a real porosity between them. We are that system, it is our body, right? There's
Right.
no separation.
And we're going to continue the conversation. This is a living installation. It's a living exhibition. It's going to continue, and I would very, very, very much like to thank each of you for being here, taking the time out for this like super relevant, important, timely conversation that is not finished.
Yes.
It is not finished.
No way.
We're just beginning.
A lot of work
Thank
to
you,
do.
Emmanuel.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emmanuel.
Thank
Thank you, Amy. And nice to meet you guys.
Thank you.